One of the main things that blockchain will do will be to help us solve public goods problems. And there's all kinds of public goods problems. A lot of them that you hear about are these big international problems like climate change and concentration of power and things like that. But I actually think it's kind of important for blockchain to experiment on smaller scales with the smaller public goods problems that happen among friend groups and churches and community organizations, where the stakes are a lot lower, but we're experimenting with getting used to how do you solve these problems. And once people have gotten used to algorithms and mechanisms to solving their little everyday public goods problems, I think they'll be better able to get behind the bigger ones being used on a governmental level. So this is a video where I'm explaining how blockchain could be used to solve an everyday problem of a friend group that wants to go on a vacation or maybe to a play, or they want to undertake something, but there's different incomes among the people in the group, and the main thing they care about is spending time together. That's the public good. We get to be together and have an experience together, but there's also this problem of money and how blockchain could be used to solve a problem like that, to start to get people used to how these mechanisms might work. All right, and I should say, you don't actually need blockchain to do this, but here's what blockchain brings to the table. So the way I want you to think of it is there's a space, imagine an online space or a shared public computer, where people can put algorithms that they designed. And that's possible right now, right? Like you could upload an algorithm anywhere you want in the public space, and maybe people would find it. Maybe it's on GitHub. But if you find an algorithm on GitHub, you don't necessarily know what is the history of this algorithm. When has it failed? Have they worked through the issues when it failed? So you don't necessarily know how trustworthy it is, because algorithms, like any technology, have to be tested. You have to find out their flaws. You have to plug the holes where the algorithm is leaking and becoming problematic, and it needs to sort of update over time. With blockchain, you can have a history of that. So if you find an algorithm on a public space, something like GitHub, but it's been on a blockchain where anyone using it, or many of the people using it, have said, I'm going to use it for this purpose, I'll report back if any problems happen. So if we're imagining an algorithm that's sitting out there to be used by anyone, you don't really trust it unless you have this history of who has used it and what's been their experience. And when they've had problems with the algorithm, have people gone in and patched up those problems? Well, blockchain gives you that. Blockchain will give you a history where you can have an algorithm, you can have anyone who intends to use it, what happened when they used it, how well did it work, what were the problems, what's the evidence that those problems have been addressed. You can have the entire history of that algorithm on a blockchain, and you can basically trust, okay, that history is reality, so I know that this algorithm has been tested and improved over time, such that maybe the last 50 users have used it with no problems whatsoever. That's a much more reliable algorithm than one that's just sitting randomly on GitHub and you have no idea if it has been tested. So that's one thing that blockchain brings. But back to our problem. Now, before I actually talk about the friends situation, I want to say one more thing about algorithms. And that is, there might be an objection to people using algorithms because they're too complicated. As a matter of fact, the algorithm I'm going to explain, it's not that complicated, but it's probably a little more complicated than the average Joe on the street wants to think about. Like, a lot of people don't want to think a lot about algorithms, and that's totally fine. We don't need everybody thinking about algorithms. But I think people often think because that's true, nobody's going to use these algorithms that they don't understand. So I want to give an argument against that. Let's think about mortgages. All right, let's rewind about 400 years to 1600 AD, and let's go into some town anywhere in the world and try to explain to people about mortgages. I mean, mortgages are kind of complicated. You pay people back at a rate of interest, and it accrues over time. There's lots of complexities having to do with mortgages, right? But that's just an algorithm. It's an algorithm that says if the lender and the buyer enter into this agreement, it can be good for both parties. And mortgages have really opened up the option for regular people to own homes. If there were no such thing as mortgages and you had to have the full house price to purchase a home, the only people who would own property would be the super, super rich. So the fact that the algorithm of a mortgage is something that everyday people have kind of learned to use, even if they don't fully understand the details, they understand enough about it to be comfortable with it and to use it. That fact has increased equality way more than many other things. So the point I'm making here is that algorithms are powerful. They have the power to reduce inequality. They have the power to address some of the deepest problems in society. If we could just get over the fact that some of them have a little bit of complexity and maybe they're somewhat difficult for the average person to understand, I just want you to know the average person doesn't need to fully understand something to use it. And the average person can understand enough about the algorithm to get used to it and trust it. And what I'm going to advocate with blockchain is that it gives us a way of having algorithms that are trustworthy enough to start to spread and be used more commonly in the population. And that will develop what I call mental infrastructure. Mental infrastructure is people's understanding of a product or a process or something in the population, and they're understanding enough of it to use it. So you have to have the mental infrastructure for technology to spread. And that's oftentimes what holds back great technologies, is the technology is great, but the mental infrastructure is not there. Well, blockchain, I think, will help with that because it means that our algorithms we're trying to spread are more trustworthy. If people are just going onto GitHub and using random algorithms, what they're going to discover in practice is that a lot of these algorithms fail. They fail at what they say they're going to do. They haven't been fixed over time. And if people try to do that, try to just borrow algorithms from GitHub, their trust in algorithms is going to go down. And that's not good for solving society's problems. Blockchain offers a solution to that where the algorithms that have a longer history can be more trustworthy for average people to use and to try. And once people get used to using some of these algorithms, it could change society. All right, finally, I'm getting to the friends example. So you have a group of friends who would like to take a spring break vacation or some kind of vacation. Maybe it's a week-long vacation or whatever, weekend vacation. But they have different incomes. Some of them are high income, some of them are low income. They also have different values for the different types of trips. Some of them really like beaches, some of them really like adding fancy dinners into the mix. But it's a group of friends, right? What they mostly care about is spending time together. The shared memories, the shared social interactions that happen on that vacation, that's really what everyone's after. It's just that they have different perspectives on what they're willing to contribute to make that experience a little bit fancier. First of all, this is a public goods problem, and what is the public good? The public good is the experience of being together. Why is it a public good? It's a public good because it's non-rival. So any friend who's there with the group during the vacation, their presence there does not diminish anybody else's ability to enjoy the trip. As a matter of fact, it's almost counter-rival. Their presence there enhances everybody's experience of the trip, that person's presence there. It does not take away. So it's definitely non-rival. In fact, it's probably counter-rival. Now, is it non-excludable? Well, actually, it is pretty excludable. You can definitely exclude someone from going on the trip. So maybe this is only half a public good. All right, and let's think about the diversity of people in this friend group. Some are higher income, some are lower income, and some of the higher income people actually might be willing to contribute more to the trip because they know they have higher incomes, they value the experience, and it's maybe for them money's not a big deal. But think about the perspective of the lower income people. It feels bad to have a friend subsidize your trip. That just doesn't feel good at all. So even if a friend offers to sort of pay your plane ticket or pay for your hotel, Nobody likes to accept charity. That somehow diminishes the equality in the relationship, and it just doesn't really work. And there's also people who care more about the fancy meals than other people. So there's lots of diversity within the group. And because of this weird dynamic, a lot of times the vacation just may never happen. All right, so instead of one friend offering to pay for another friend's hotel or air flight, what could happen is the friend group could ask around and try to figure out what might be affordable among the amount of money that the friends collectively could contribute. And maybe that's a 4-day trip to a beach house with like 3 fancy meals or something like that. The friend group would then sort of put together a description of the package, everybody's flights, which we could buy collectively, the cost of the beach house, we could buy that collectively, the cost of a fancy meal in the area, the cost of alcohol. They add up all the expenses. They say, here's what we could offer. For this 4-day trip, what would you personally bid? And the bid goes into an algorithm, into a system where nobody gets to see your bid. It's completely private. You could say, you know what, I really can't afford that much, so I might pay $100 for that whole thing, even though I know very well it costs way more than $100. Someone else might say, oh my gosh, I would love to have that experience with my friends. I would pay $3,000 for it, even though I know it costs way less per person than $3,000. But everyone sort of submits, this is the maximum I would pay for that experience. The algorithm then spits out how much collectively are we willing to pay, and is that over or under the trip we've envisioned? And if it's over, we've got a surplus of money. We can distribute that surplus according to the bids, so you get a 10% discount or 20% discount on your bid based on the collective bids. If it's under the amount, the friend group could say, okay, can we see what everyone's willing to bid? Can we reduce the quality of the meals a little bit by looking for cheaper food in the area to get it down within the budget of what our friend group has bid on? And then sort of redo the exercise to see if we can get a match. And at the end of the day, what that leads to is it's not one friend cross-subsidizing another, it's sort of everyone contributing according to their personal ability and preferences, and making an experience happen that might not otherwise happen without the algorithm. Now, I should also say, this example is a little bit goofy. It's not perfect. You can poke holes in this particular example. I'm really just throwing out algorithms to sort of get us thinking about the kind of thing that blockchain could enable. Now, but I want to defend it a little bit more. So imagine a PTA, a parent-teacher association, where there's different preferences among the parents about what should be provided for their kids' schools. And some parents are willing to contribute more, and some parents can't contribute more. And some parents are more stingy even though they could contribute more. Imagine using a mechanism like this in a PTA group to provide some sort of service at your kid's school, which would be a fun way to sort of collectively create something that we might not be able to create without the algorithm. So this is just me trying to be kind of creative with algorithms and with ways to solve some of society's problems. If we could get used to this kind of algorithm, we could scale it up and use it in different situations and test it out and see where it works and where it doesn't work and what are the failure criteria and what situations is it not good for, what situations is it good for. If we could trust our algorithms, we could sort of learn to use ones that could solve a lot of problems. And I think we need to name the algorithms too. I think if we're going to have an algorithm that starts to work, people are starting to borrow it to solve their little friend group problems, their PTA problems, we need to sort of have a word such that it could spread faster through the mental infrastructure. And maybe that would be like raspberry blue. This is the raspberry blue algorithm, and it's good for friend groups where there's different preferences and different income levels where they want to come together to create a shared experience. That's raspberry blue. So I don't know, I'm just having fun coming up with contracts and ways to be creative with economics and with blockchain. But I'd like to talk about how this might work in a situation where maybe collectively the people would like to take over a tech monopoly. Maybe we think the tech monopoly is causing problems for mental health and for societal stability and for people's rights. Maybe the tech monopoly is not respecting people's rights and we want to do something to take it over. Could we use an algorithm sort of in the vein of this to buy up a social media company and make a collectively owned, collectively governed social media company that does a better job with user rights and transparency? And I'll do that in another video.